Hey, everybody out there in, what is it? I guess it's video land. Um,
YouTube land.
YouTube land, definitely that. Welcome to A Real Point of View. I am your host, Greg Morgan, and I am the real movie guy, film critic. And joining me are two other film critics that are internet film critics, Miss Karen D, who's the movie maven, and Mr. Stephen C, who is the man who never picks a bad movie. Um,
Allegedly.
I did not miss that last week.
Allegedly.
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 All righty.
Yeah.
Well, this
Spooky.
week, last week was kind of a cartoon kind of week, and Steve and Karen were not able to have their the steamroller versus the steamroller competition here. Uh, but this week's a new week, and we're not going to talk about cartoons this week or Marvel or DC. Oh, wait, I'm doing it right now. Sorry about that. This week, we're going to continue our delve into the decades from 1967 all the way to 2017. 50 years of film, 50 years of wonderful film, seems like. Seems like each decade seems to take us to another point and another part of our plateau, edging so ever so closely to 2017. And now we're pretty close because they're going to do films from 2007. So only 10 years left to go. And so, in looking at a lot of the different films, we were looking at different films and trying to fight over what films we wanted to discuss with you tonight. And whether you agree with us or not, doesn't really matter. We still want to introduce you to some films you may or may not have seen. And if you've seen them, of course, reintroduce you to them and give them another chance. And then some films that you may not have known about that maybe we can give at least some enlightenment about during our conversation today. So, Karen, did you have kind of an overview for 2007 as you have been kind of give us some chronological things and trends that have happened during those previous decades?
Why? Why? Yes, I do. Um, um,
Is
and
before you go on, is Forrest Gump, is your cousin Forrest Gump with you? Because I think you were about to say something about a bowl of chocolates.
yeah, you just
Was
never know what you're going to get with me from one week to the next. Um, yes, I did have just a couple of things I want to say, and I'll try to keep it short. Because I don't, what I will just say is that as we get closer and closer to, our time, which the 2017, there is less and less to say about history because we lose the advantage of perspective. And so 1997, I think in terms of how we really feel about 1997, that's still like a process of becoming, mainly because it was only 20 years ago. And even more so with 2007, that's only 10 years ago. And so in my mind, we have some inklings of how we feel about 2007, about where our world is in that time, but we don't have the gift of distance to really accurately specify or to really identify what our feelings are. What I will say is that 2007 was sort of the year before we experienced a great many changes in 2008. 2007, the country was falling deeper and deeper into a major financial crisis. And it is this financial crisis that was in large part responsible for this country electing its first African-American president, Barack Obama, who became president the following year in 2008. In 2007, the housing market was melting. There were major issues with hedge fund companies on Wall Street that were going bankrupt or looking as if they were just going to fall apart. Bernie Madoff.
With our money.
Well, it wasn't my money.
No, I'm just
it's
saying.
like the one.
Madoff with our money.
Oh yes, Bernie Madoff made off with our money, absolutely. And he concocted the largest Ponzi scheme ever in the history of the United States, and no one has ever even come close. So that was going on. On the other hand, Nancy Pelosi became the first woman ever elected as Speaker of the House of Representatives. And the House, both the House and the Senate were Democratic, both controlled by Democrats, but that was going to change 2 years later after the elections of 2009, in which the House would become Republican controlled. So the other thing that was very interesting, just in my quick sort of perusal of some events that happened, was that there seemed to be a lot of weather-related events going on, like really lethal tornadoes, really lethal floods in different parts of the country that really, injured and killed a great number of people. The Departed won Best Picture for 2007. So what does that mean? That means that Martin Scorsese finally ended his drought as like the best known director who never won an Oscar. He couldn't claim that title anymore because he actually won. He actually won for The Departed. And what else was going on? I mean, the economy was really top of mind, I think, in 2007. Housing prices were sky high. And people were just trying to figure out how they could afford a house. And then at the same time, the housing market was slowing down. So people who thought they could like make a killing in the housing market, because had been making a killing in 2003, 4, and 5, were now finding they couldn't really make a killing. In 2007, the chickens were really starting to come home to roost. And unfortunately, 2007 was the year in which we saw far more evidence of the specter of terrorism. The United States Embassy, I believe it was in Athens, was attacked with a surface-to-air missile. There were terror incidents in Somalia. There was an explosion that involved Dick Cheney. However, he was not injured. He was on site at the time of the attack. And there were a number of mass shootings and murders. Of the most notorious was one that occurred at Blacksburg, Virginia, in which over 30 people were killed by a man who had a significant history of mental health issues, but had absolutely no problem getting guns, and every gun that he owned was legally obtained. And that caused a huge debate about gun control in this country and the rights of those people who have mental health issues to be able to obtain guns. But no significant changes to American law resulted due to that debate. The Sears Tower was thrown as the tallest building in the world by a building in Dubai. So that happened in 2007 when that building finally surpassed the Sears Tower. So that's just, some of the stuff that was happening. At the same time, there were a lot of great films that came out in 2007, some of which we're going to talk about today.
Very cool. Thanks, Karen. Appreciate that. You never really realize how your lives are affected by so many different things at the same time, really. In fact, my wife and I were able to take advantage of that just prior to 2007, as far as the housing crisis is concerned. We actually sold our house in 2006 and made a large profit due to the fact that so many people in California were looking for better housing and more bang for their buck, and so they were getting bigger houses in Arizona. So the Arizona real estate market was going crazy in selling houses, and my wife and I were able to take advantage of that just before 2007. So, yeah, I do understand that. We were actually a part of that situation, and on the positive side of it, fortunately. Okay, so let's get to what we really want to talk about, and that's movies, guys. So each of us have a few movies that we want to discuss, or at least kind of give you an overview about, and movies that we thought were viable enough for us to talk about, and also for you guys to watch when you get the opportunity. So why don't we do this? I'm always asking who wants to go first. Well, I'll go first, and then we'll go. How about me, Karen, Steve? How's that?
Okay.
Oh my
Um,
Unless you want to go first, Steve, that'd be cool.
he's so dramatic. Gregory, you can go first. That way you can build up to Steve.
God. I mean, we are talking about movies, so drama is necessary.
Good point.
I mean, if we really think about it, think of all of Greg's movies, and that's just chock full of drama.
Whatever. Now I can understand if you had heard what the movies were already, Steve. But you don't even know what they are yet. That's okay.
So dramatic.
You've only heard one of mine.
What?
I said you've only known one of mine.
I'm going to talk about mine.
Start, Greg.
And I don't need $1 million. Okay.
Oh, there won't be any lawsuits from that. Okay.
I said I didn't want any. That's different.
Right.
That's public domain.
You got to change 10%, right?
That's fair. Okay, we won't get into that. Okay.
Moving on.
Moving on. Movie on.
Movie on. Bad pun. Panda strikes again.
Yes. We better get a lawman. Where's Quick Draw when you need him?
Oh,
Somewhere in Maryland, I think.
don't get me started. I know.
Somewhere guarding the fort in Maryland. Okay. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen. Those are the inside humor that we have. So the first movie I want to talk about was a movie. There's a lot of movies out there that are murder mysteries, a lot of movies that are murder thrillers, a lot of movies that are murder horror films. But it's very rarely do you see a film that's a murder musical. And so, yes, I was able to find a murder musical. And, at first I was thinking, okay, I'm going to go to this film, watch it, and see how it goes, and see if I like it a little bit. And I watched it, I ended up liking it a lot. Now, I love music. I'm a musicaholic. I'm a movieaholic as well, but I'm definitely a musicaholic. And so the film that I saw in 2007 was a film with Johnny Depp as the main character, the dreaded barber. And the name of the movie is Sweeney Todd. I found Sweeney Todd to be actually very entertaining. But let's be very honest, ladies and gentlemen, this is a very dark. Did I say dark? It's a dark film.
How dark was it?
Well, if you're outside at midnight and you can see the light in the far distance, that's too light. It's much darker than that.
Wow. I guess it was really dark.
Let me tell you, it was dark. It was a dark film.
Like if you watch it with the lights off, you can't even see the movie.
Well, yeah. Kind of like that, except, okay, let me rephrase that. The essence of the film and the characters was dark. Really dark, very dark. How
dark were they?
Well, let's just say they were so dark they were kind of pale, looked like they were dead, but they weren't. Or were they? Basically, the essence of this film is, this is one of those films that you don't know initially that it's a revenge film. Johnny Depp's character has fallen in love with this beautiful woman and he can no longer be with. And he ends up going to jail. And he eventually gets out of jail and he comes back to the land that he knew, his homeland. But he comes back a very, very different, very changed individual, an individual who left as a heartbroken person, comes back as a vengeful, pretty much murdering barber. In fact, Sweeney Todd goes through so many different gambits in this film of just horror and also music and songs. I thought this was going to be a really laughing situation for me when I was watching this film. And the more I watched it, the more I started getting into it because you truly get into the story and you truly feel for Johnny Depp's character, which is Sweeney Todd, who is this barber who gets a cohort to in his devilish schemes of killing people. So he's got to kill these people that he wants to kill, but he doesn't know how to get rid of the bodies and get rid of the odor. Well, there's a lady who makes some really nice savory pies nearby. And so they come together as one. They come together as one to be able to not only get rid of the bodies, but make a small profit too, because these pies are so good, so unusually good that everyone in town wants one. And so now they're becoming affluent as well because of these savory pies. So I really like this movie. It's pretty dramatic, obviously. I thought it was going to be quirky because of the singing, but it really wasn't. Like a lot of pretty decent films and musicals that we see, they're adapted from theater to film, which is what this is. It's a Broadway hit that was adapted to film. You find that it actually works, just like it did on stage. It actually works in the movie itself as well. And then you're listening to people who are singing that you never thought could sing, like Johnny Depp. Not saying that these are very powerful voices or anything like that, but you can hear the drama, you can hear the angst, you can hear the anger, you can hear the sorrow in their voices as they're singing these certain songs throughout the film, and which are supposed to invoke a certain emotion that they truly do in the film. I thought they did a pretty good job in this movie. Really good actors in it: Johnny Depp, Helena Bonham Carter, Alan Rickman, who's one of my favorite actors and actually actor friend to the show in the sense of an actor that we respect and admire on the show. Just some really, really good performances. And I really like this film. Did you guys get a chance to see Sweeney Todd?
No, it's too creepy for me.
You know, it was creepy, but it was actually, this is going to sound really funny, it was kind of tasteful, but I don't mean so much as in great. I meant, you know, they made the savory body, you know,
Really good.
and stuff like that. So very tasteful. Definitely fair words there. But all in all, I thought it was a really interesting movie. And it had some really interesting parts where you not only just felt for the character, but you started disliking the characters that they didn't like, the people they didn't like, and you saw why. And so you felt even that they were being, I don't know, slightly justified in doing what they were doing. And that's when they have you. That's when they grab you and they pull you in to their circumstance and make you believe that what they're doing is right. So this is a pretty good movie. I suggest everybody see this film at least once. It's a lot better film, and the plot is a lot better plot than one might think, being a movie musical about murder and mayhem. Sweeney Todd. I think it's a good film. You should take a look at it. So let's go with Karen. What film do you have coming up here, Karen?
Before you do that, who directed it? Who?
Well, I don't always talk about the director. This was directed by, of course. That's why you brought it up, Karen. Another one of our favorite directors here. This is Tim Burton. This is a Tim Burton film. So yeah, Tim Burton's a pretty good director, huh?
Yeah.
Well, of course,
So the
he
music
was.
is from Hugh Wheeler. The writer, the screenplay is John Logan. So, but Tim Burton as a director, producer, pretty affluent as far as film is concerned. And we were talking about Tim Burton just not too many weeks ago, actually, on this show.
Right. Awesome.
Very cool.
Well, the first film that I want to talk about is a film called The Great Debaters.
Ah, Denzel.
A- And yes, it stars Denzel Washington and Forrest Whitaker, Kimberly Elise, Nate Parker, who wasn't very well known at that time, at least outside of the industry, but had, really got a lot of favorable notice for his turn in this film. The film is the story of, it's a drama, and it's loosely based on a man by the name of Melvin Tolson, and Denzel Washington plays Melvin Tolson. Melvin Tolson was a union organizer, and he was also a professor at Wiley College in Texas in the 1930s, and there really was a Wiley College. And this was a HBCU, historically Black college or university, in this case it was an historically Black college. And Tolson was, while he was trying to dodge the Klan and dodge corporate thugs because he was a union organizer, he was trying to shape debaters. He was trying to shape the minds of young African-American men and women, and he was trying to tell them that they really did deserve to be the best and to compete against the best. And they dared, or Tolson dared to challenge the Harvard Debating Club, which was the absolute cream of the crop in the United States, if not in the world, in the 1930s. They actually dared to challenge the Harvard debating team to a debate, and that was just unheard of. So this movie is about the journey to get to Harvard, and just how these young men, there was one woman who was on the debate team, how they worked with each other to try to hone their debating skills, and how Tolson kept guiding them, even if he was in jail, even if, the college was ready to fire him, even, so many things that kept going wrong. But Tolson refused to be deterred. So that's basically what the story is about. In terms of the film, I remember going to the cinema to see this movie. I thought it was a really good movie. It was very thought-provoking, for one. Because even though there was, I'm sure, a great deal of dramatic license taken with this movie, I thought this was a story, and I guess I'm just sort of really focused on that these days. This is a story that you don't necessarily see presented that often. And it's almost become a cliche, the way in which we tell people to follow their dreams, or, nothing's impossible. And, but in the 1930s, dreams got broken all the time, and no one talked about following your dreams no matter what. No one had that luxury. In 1935, the country was just coming out of a depression. And in Texas, they probably hadn't even gotten the news that the depression was over yet, where Wiley College was. So there were no dreams. And there was a real divide between those, especially in the African-American community, between those people who had to work for a living and those people who had the luxury of actually considering college. And so if you were African American in the 1930s, especially in Texas, and you even had the chance to talk about going to college, that was incredibly, incredibly serious undertaking. And, and people treated it as if it was a matter of life or death, because it really was. One of the subplots of the story was about James Farmer Sr., who was an actual person, who had a son, James Farmer Jr., and he wrote him so hard. I mean, he almost broke his son. He wrote him so hard. Well, James Farmer Jr. grew up to be a major leader in the civil rights struggle in the 1960s. And he, kind of got started on this debating team going up against Harvard. And just as a sidelight, the actor who played James Farmer Jr., his name was Denzel Washington. And no, it was not Denzel. Denzel Whitaker. And that's what was so odd. It was Denzel Whitaker because Forrest Whitaker played James Farmer Sr., and Denzel Washington was the director and star of the movie, and this guy's name was Denzel. So people for the longest time thought that Denzel Whitaker must be related to Denzel Washington or Forrest Whitaker or something, and he wasn't related to either person. He just happened to have this really weird name, which probably helped him get the job, but what do I know? Anyway, I was hoping this movie would be nominated for an Academy Award. It was nominated for a Golden Globe. It didn't win, but it was nominated for the Best Motion Picture Drama. It did win awards from BET and from the African American Film Critics Association. Nate Parker was sort of played the main debater who, through somewhere towards the middle of the movie, has a crisis of conscience and isn't able to participate in the debates at one point, but then he comes back. Nate Parker, as I'm sure a lot of people in our audience will remember, was the writer and the producer for the Birth of a Nation movie, which captured the imagination of the Sundance Film Festival in 2015, the end of 2015. But that's the same Nate Parker who played one of the lead roles in what was essentially an ensemble picture in this movie. Denzel Washington was the director of this movie. So he starred in and directed this movie. And I have to say, I kind of wish that there was some award somewhere for best actor who directs a picture or best director who acts in a picture, because I don't know how Denzel Washington does it, but I think this is something that needs to be recognized in some way. But I really am just stunned at how good he is at directing himself in movies and at helming a movie in which he has a significant role. It started with Antoine Fisher, but he's just gotten better and better. And frankly, as I've said on other occasions, I think he was robbed at the Academy Awards by not getting or this past year's Academy Awards by not getting Best Director for Fences. He totally deserved it, as far as I'm concerned.
I thought so for sure for Fences, most definitely. But he, like you said, he did a good job in each of those three movies. So
I'm surprised it's really, really hard, because if you're the director, it's your vision that's getting played up on that screen, and you've got to babysit that. And how it's very difficult to do that and then step away from that, become the actor and do what an actor is supposed to do. And who gives you direction if you're the damn director? How do you do that? But I'm just shocked at the consistency of his acting, Denzel Washington's acting, and at just the very steady hand that he seems to bring, and at the performances that he's able to get out of his actors, the ensemble he creates. I think he puts a lot of thought into casting, and that's 70% of the game as far as I'm concerned. And he does his homework in terms of that, and then he nurtures that. I mean, I think he really is kind of like an actor's director. So he understands the process, the different processes that actors may go through. And I think there's a certain amount of honoring of that. Otherwise, I don't know where these performances are coming from. He's really just extraordinarily adept at this particular, being able to direct and act at the same time. I'm just stunned at that.
Yeah, I agree. Um, Still an actor on his own anyway, but to also be able to facilitate that, as you alluded to, in the director's chair and also the actor's chair in the same film. I think they probably take different takes, and he looks at that and sees where he could do better. That's the only thing that makes sense to me. But yeah, good movie. I love that movie. I've seen it twice.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that movie. It was very well done. And I used to debate in college, so it has a soft spot in my heart because of that.
Indeed. Well, how about you, Steve? Any comments, first of all, about the films that have been mentioned so far? And if not, what do you got for us?
I really enjoyed Sweeney Todd, The Demon Barber of Fleet Street. I thought it was unique how it went from a love story and then it had a love story in a revenge story, and the way they kind of intertwined everything. The characters were very well done. Johnny Depp turned in a really good performance, and Helena Bonham Carter, who was still married to Tim Burton at the time, but is no longer anymore. She just brings just a different style to.
Yeah, I thought they were both believable for sure.
Right. Even though she seems to always do a darker style in her impressions in movies, even when she seems like she's a brighter person. In the movie Dark Shadows, she's actually not a darker individual person. She's actually colorful and a bright and I would say a shiny person, but she still has a certain dark demeanor to her, and it's just unique and different. And I feel like she does Great Debaters a long time ago. 2007 is when it came out.
10 years.
For me, that's a lifetime ago.
Right.
Just because of life situations and things like that during that period of time, and then moving forward. But from what I remember, it was a very educational timepiece, and I thought they did a really good job with it.
Very cool. So what did you got, brother?
A phenomenon of sorts, and it's called the 23 Enigma. The movie was directed by Joel Schumacher. It stars Jim Carrey and Virginia Madison. The movie is called The Number 23, and it deals with the number 7 is believed to be a lucky number. 13 is believed to be an unlucky number. The number 23 is deemed an incident number. Things seem to happen. Things seems to follow that number all around. Julius Caesar, the closest recording of his assassination, the most quoted song, in movies, for example, since we are on a movie YouTube show, in the disaster movie Airport, the bomber sits in seat 23. The number of crosses on the cavalry at the end of the Monty Python film, The Life of Brian, is 23. In Die Hard with a Vengeance, the train derails at subway station 23. 23. And just small things like that all this number seems to always appear, whether it's in history, whether it's in particular crazy events in people's lives, and even in movies, they make a point to use it in certain ways, whether randomly or intentional. The number 23 is Jim Carrey is a animal what's the word I'm looking for? Animal control person. He goes around and picks up stray dogs and cats and other animals like that. And it's his birthday. His wife, who's played by Virginia Madison, they end up going out to eat and having a fun day and a fun date night. And they end up going to a bookstore where Madison picks up a book for Jim as.
I'm sorry, as what again?
Book is a red leatherback book called The Number 23. And so he picks it up. He finds it interesting. She buys it for him as a gift, and they go home. Well, he starts reading it, and he ends up being that he's super connected to this character, things that are happening and that happened in this character's life when the character who's called Fingerling goes back and describes his childhood. That's things that happened from Sparrow, Jim Carrey's character's childhood, and to get in and deeper into the book. Well, then he slowly starts to figure out that this Fingerling character is obsessed with the number 23. And the obsession slowly starts to eat away at Jim Carrey's character, and it dissolves into him people around him believing he's going crazy because of his obsession. He has a dream where he murders his wife, and when he tells her about it, he tells her that if she's not careful, the number is going to come to get her. It's not him, it's not another person, it's the number 23 is going to do it. He starts to see instances with time dealing with 23, dealing with the numbers 2-3, dealing with days or weeks or dates that add up to 23 and things like that. He slowly understands that the connection with this character in the book gets deeper and deeper, and it's an epiphany of what's going on. And he uses that and tries to discover, what's happening to him, what's going on with his life. I kind of don't want to ruin the movie for plot points' sake. I know it came out in 2007. You should have seen it already, but it's a really good movie that does an amazing job of taking you through twists and turns of someone who believes they're getting too deep into the story. You're reading too much into it, when in fact it's necessary for him to read too much into this by the end of the movie, and he slowly comes to terms with his past and coming to grips with himself and what he's going through. Wow, and cool. It's really interesting. It didn't get great acclaimed reviews, but it's well worth a sit down look. And it's interesting. It's a very interesting, almost puzzle like movie.
Wow, it actually does sound kind of interesting. I saw the movie advertised, never actually took a chance or the opportunity to see it, but maybe I'll do that now. Thanks, Steve. I appreciate that.
It's a it's one of Jim Carrey's more serious roles. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, The Majestic, along those lines.
Okay, and I did see The Majestic, so I can empathize.
It was good.
That. It was very good. Well, going to my next movie, I found this movie to be kind of quirky. I think originally when I went to see it was more, my thought was I was going to be seeing a documentary or a docudrama about a musical icon in the persona or person of Bob Dylan. And what I got when I saw this movie was a representation of different aspects of Bob Dylan's life through 6 different people. So this is a very unusual, very different kind of film. And it used 6 different actors to play Bob Dylan at certain points in Bob Dylan's life. And it even prompted me to see, there's a important interview in the film, and it prompted me to actually see original footage of the actual interview with Bob Dylan. Now it is different. It has its nuances in the film because obviously, you know, each film has its own take on what they believe makes sense and or is what's going to draw the audience into the film. But what was really interesting about this is the different characters. And um, Heath Ledger, at the time he was with us, plays one aspect of Bob Dylan. Marcus Carl Franklin, um, who plays another aspect, he's a child in this movie, but he's playing Bob Dylan in this film, and he is an Afrocentric actor playing Bob Dylan, and he's playing Bob Dylan as an adult, even though he's a child. So that itself was another kind of quirky aspect. And then another actor who I really love in a lot of films, and this to me was a proof in acting ability, and taking something quirky that typically this particular actor seemed like you would see him in more dramatic roles and sometimes a little safer roles, I would say. And that's Richard Gere. Richard
Hmm.
Gere also is Bob Dylan in this film. Um, and an actor who I really like, and especially his portrayal as Batman in recent films, which is Christian Bale. He also plays uh, Bob Dylan. Ben Whishaw, also another not so well known actor, but a good actor, plays Bob Dylan. But the one that hit me the most, and the one reason why I even brought up the interview, is because the interview was this particular actor played Bob Dylan in the interview phase, as well as other quirky phases. And the one that really hit me, and one of the reasons why I even wanted to see the movie, was because I had seen a trailer with Cate Blanchett as Bob Dylan.
Hmm.
And everybody's role was a little different. And what was funny to me, that I felt was kind of funny, is we have a lot of people out there who are really good actors, and a lot of them are voice over actors. And we also have people who do impressions. Well, here's all these people trying to sound like Bob Dylan. It was hilarious to me to listen to the different voices to try to capture Bob Dylan. And again, it had me paralleling with real documentaries, with real interviews with Bob Dylan. So if nothing else, if this movie does nothing else, it helps you to understand Bob Dylan maybe a little bit more. But it does open up the floodgates when it comes to, perceptions of what Bob Dylan was like during certain parts in times in his life, and what he really stood for. And it's kind of murky because the way that he presented himself in the actual interviews, and also the way that these different actors portrayed him, you're a little lost. You're still kind of ambiguous about where you really are in understanding who Bob Dylan really was and what he was trying to get us to understand in his music. And one of the things I thought was really cool about the film too was the different questions that the media had for him, and how he either decided to answer them or decided to evade them. And that in itself was its own quirkiness. But it was even more so if you found certain documentaries of these certain interviews that the press had with Bob Dylan, the real Bob Dylan. Um, and some people might think he was very, very crafty. Some people may feel and look at him as being very creative. Some people look at him as being the voice of the nation at the time when the nation was in turmoil, and this is in the 60s, when Bob Dylan was really at his earliest popularity, writing these songs that were considered hopeful America in the 60s because of anti-war music, or anti-violence music, or anti-riot music. And to hear his answers as to what motivated him, like even listening to him talking about an album cover. Well, someone asking him about these album cover and what the album cover felt to them, and he was like, well, no, it was just something that I saw and just decided to put it on the album cover. And the guy who's talking to him, the interviewer, is like, it's so intense. He's like, well, when I saw that cover, it made me think about the life in the world and how things were going. And he says, and were you looking at that? Was that something that was you were striving for when you were looking at this album cover? He goes, not
Oh, I
really.
just need an album cover.
And that was kind of how his answer was. Of, not really. No, didn't really have anything to do with the songs. I just saw it and it looked like it might be nice for the cover. And that's how he approached a lot of things in this film. And you see that in the movie, how they answer, how the quirkiness is, how they're presenting the music and talking about, different things. I think this movie is fun to watch because of the nuances and the different perspectives that are given by the different quote unquote Bob Dylans. Especially the youngest Bob Dylan, and he's the one that actually rode the trains with the hobos. And so to see his interaction with them, and they're talking to him like he's a grown up. I mean, it's just really a very, very, very quirky movie. So, but my suggestion would be to watch this film and take a look online, because the interviews are online, at some of the different interviews. And even the parts where they were trying to give you a little more detail, like he asked somebody, because he couldn't find a match to light a cigarette, he asked somebody in the audience, could he borrow a light? And the way that the camera angle is in the film and the camera angle in the interview are so very different. And so now you're looking at someone trying to interpret what was going on at the time when this truly happened back in Bob Dylan's life. So I suggest everybody take a look at the movie. I think you'll get a kick out of it. And the name of the film again is I'm Not There. Six
Wow.
Bob Dylans, okay? Very, very, very cool.
I got an interesting fact.
Sure. Share.
The only reason Jimi Hendrix ever sang on a song was because of Bob Dylan.
Really? Tell us more.
Yeah. Jimi Hendrix was only going to play guitar. That was going to be the Jimi Hendrix experience, was going to be him and his bandmates playing music and just, having just major jam sessions for audiences and everything. He was going to bring other singers on to do some of his work and all that. And he listened to a record that somebody had with Bob Dylan singing and said, oh, if he can sing, I can sing. I know I can do this.
that would be true.
And that's why Jimi Hendrix started singing.
Wow.
Also, Bob Dylan was going to sue Jimi Hendrix for All Along the Watchtower.
Really?
Dylan, of course, it was originally a limerick, and then Dylan heard it and he turned it into a song. Well, 6 months later, Jimi Hendrix comes out with the exact same song. There's no confirmation one way or another of somebody handing Jimmy it and him writing over it or him covering for Dylan. This went on for a couple years and nothing ever got settled. And one of the lawyers actually asked in a meeting if Bob Dylan had ever heard Jimi Hendrix sing it. Dylan said, no, I've never sat down and listened to it. It's my song. And the lawyer said, just listen to it and then we'll go from there. At least just listen to it. So Bob Dylan goes in, I think in the middle of one of his concerts, and sits in a back room and puts it on and listens to it. And when he comes out, he gives a message to one of his stage guys telling him to call the lawyer and said, it's fine, Jimmy can have it.
Huh. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And here's the thing about Dylan too, and I think that's the crazy thing, because even I was a Dylan skeptic. That's another reason why I thought I should look at the movie. But when I listened, even at the beginning of the movie, when you listen to the music in the beginning, it is very clear, majority of anybody listening to Bob Dylan, that he's just not the best singer out there. Not even close.
But mildly.
But my point is, a lot of times, and now I think I understand a lot of other people's music experience, is you really need to listen to the words and the rhythm of the music. And as I was doing that, even in the beginning of the movie, the music that's being played at the beginning of the movie, I'm sorry, at the beginning of the film, you realize that this is actually really good.
Mm-hmm.
You find yourself giving Bob Dylan a chance, and now I understand his popularity all these decades. Very very interesting. It definitely drew me in.
Prize for literature.
Say again?
There's a reason that he won the Nobel Prize for literature.
Yeah,
That's true.
he is a wordsmith. That is very true.
I mean, he's
Okay.
brilliant, he's a genius. There's no question about it. And the first person to demonstrate with no doubt that you don't have to be able to sing to sing.
Yeah, for real.
And I have an arm's list of people that who I think of that people, and I don't think their lyrics are quite as good, but you know, I'm a slight convert, not totally, but I'm a slight convert because of this experience in this film. So give it a chance. I'm not there.
All right.
What else you got?
Okay.
My second film is called Fracture. And this was one of my all-time favorite movies of 2007. Just delicious, delicious fun. It stars Anthony Hopkins, Ryan Gosling, Rosamund Pike, David Strathairn, and others. The director is Gregory Hoblet, and written by Daniel Pine and Glenn Gers. And I just love this movie. For one, I really like Anthony Hopkins. I mean, he's really a wonderful actor, and I'm not quite sure how sometimes he pulls off the acting that he does, because the method isn't very obvious. I mean, he doesn't go through any physical transformation. He often doesn't bother with like actually trying to speak like in the native language of the person, like say accented language. Like if he's playing a German, he still sounds like Anthony Hopkins. And if he's playing, and if he's playing a Native American, he still sounds like Anthony Hopkins. And if he's
or a Spaniard,
or Spaniard, he sounds like Anthony Hopkins. So it's not like he's doing that stuff, and he doesn't gain weight or lose weight or anything like that. He doesn't go through any sort of physical transformation for his roles that is immediately ascertainable, but he still manages to pull off, really compelling, enactments, roles. He still manages to do that without those obvious sort of, mechanics, I guess, for lack of a better word. So, and I'm not quite sure how or why, but he does. So in this movie, and I mean, I think he's done comedy too, in this movie, he plays a structural or an aerospace engineer, an aerospace structural engineer type person. So what kind of personality is that? I mean, if you're an engineer, you generally are very meticulous, and you are very detail oriented. You have incredible spatial, aptitude, and things like that, that tend to govern your life. And you're probably, especially if you're an engineer, you're probably a perfectionist. Everything must add up, or you don't go any further until it does. So that's this guy. And the movie opens because Anthony Hopkins, who, he's older, but of course he married some young thing. And her name was Mbeth. Beth Davitz, I guess is how her name is pronounced. She plays his wife. She's a young thing, and he suspects that she's unfaithful. So he decides, well, I'm an aerospace engineer. I'm the smartest guy in the room. I'm going to pull off the perfect murder, and I'm going to just dispose of my cheating, freaky wife. So he concocts this scheme to do just that. So that's how the movie opens. He shoots his wife. However, things go awry because he doesn't kill her. And that's where the movie gets started. She's critically injured. She's gravely injured, but she is not killed. So the movie takes off from there. Now, Anthony Hopkins' character runs headlong into Ryan Gosling's character. And he plays a guy named Willie Beecham. Willie Beecham is this up-and-coming, extremely brash, arrogant, like the type of pissant kind of person you just want to slap, but you can't because he really is. He thinks he's the smartest guy in the room too. You've got what happens when you have two guys who think they're the smartest guys in the room going at each other? Well, you have a battle of titans. And that's what happens here. So Willie Beecham is a criminal lawyer. He's an assistant DA. David Strathairn plays his boss, the district attorney. But he is an assistant DA. He's known for winning his cases because he takes the right pleas. He's very savvy. He's very strategic, that kind of thing. It's not like he's all that much tested in the courtroom, but he knows how to burn them and churn them, I guess, when it comes to the cases. And he is tired of criminal law. He is on his way out the door. And he looks good, he dresses well, and he's got corporate law firms, civil law firms, all kinds of law firms that have nothing to do with crime and have nothing to do with him getting his hands dirty. They're sniffing all over him. And in fact, there's one major civil law firm, huge law firm, that is that close to making him an offer. Mm-hmm. And this case comes up, and Willie Beecham's like, He gets assigned the case, and Willie Beecham's like, I'm on my way out. This will be a good way to this will be my swan song. And this will prove that I am all that in a bag of chips, because I'm just so smart. I can dispense with this case. And everybody else, his boss and everybody else is like, take the case. It'll give you like a nice feather in your cap as you're on your way out the door. And it's open and shut, which are the words. Open and shut are the three words a trial lawyer never wants to hear as she is about to take on a case. You never want to hear that, because guess what? There's no such thing as an open and shut case.
So Karen,
that's
can I ask you a question?
Begins.
Can I ask you a question? So you know a lot about the
law? No, I really don't.
Steve is trying to give us a comparison of to your knowledge. Ryan Gosling's knowledge of the law as an actor and your knowledge of the law as an actor.
Wow. Stunning. Absolutely stunning. I just don't know what to do with this information.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you're watching this in the past or if you're watching this for the first time, our sister Karen here knows a lot about the law. Literally a lot about the law. So her saying something about this guy, it makes sense. Now, back to Karen talking about her movie.
Well, so anyway, that's where the movie begins. And what Willie Beecham figures out is that Anthony Hopkins' character, who is top bill cast, let me just see, who plays Ted Crawford. That's who that is. So Willie Beecham figures out that Ted Crawford is guilty of attempted murder, but he doesn't know how. And unfortunately, all the evidence seems to indicate that he was the last person who could have done anything to his wife. And so this elaborate cat and mouse game begins where Willie Beecham's trying to outsmart Ted Crawford. Ted Crawford's trying to outsmart Willie Beecham, and they just go back and forth. And watching them try to outsmart each other is just really delicious. This is a very well acted film, and I think this is a case where the actors elevate the material that they were given. And they may have even elevated the director. Greg Hoblet, who's the director, is really more of like a TV kind of director guy. He did direct Ed Norton in Primal Fear, and Ed Norton received an Oscar nomination. If he didn't win, he definitely got the nomination, but I don't think he won for that film, but I can't remember off the top of my head. But he was Oscar nominated for Primal Fear, a very good movie. But he's done NYPD Blue, and he's done a number of other television movies and shows, and that's where most of his director type projects that really fall more into the television category than the film category. And I think one of the interesting things is the camera work, because there's a lot of what's called, I think, the loose camera work technique, which, as it turns out, became very popular during NYPD Blue. It's sort of like this it's not quite shaky, but it's like a lot of really quick takes. And it became really popular when NYPD Blue was a popular series. But it sort of fell by the wayside because, frankly, people were getting vertigo from the camera work, and it was also just considered a very distracting sort of camera method, and it sort of distracted from the story. Well, Greg Hoblet used that in NYPD Blue, and he brought it back for Fracture. And for Fracture, it actually kind of works. For one, movies are just it's a slower art form anyway. So if you've got a really slow art form that's interspersed with some quick cut takes, that's not nearly as distracting, depending on how you do it. So I think it was more artful here. And I think because Ryan Gosling is an excellent actor, La La Land notwithstanding, and I think Anthony Hopkins is amazing. So when you've got them going at each other, and they're both so much in character, and they're just looking for weak spots, and just one tiny little slip could make all the difference between, getting away with a huge crime or not getting away at all. And Ryan Gosling has stuff hanging in the balance. He has his career hanging in the balance, as it turns out, because while this great law firm is that close to making an offer, they haven't actually made the offer. And guess what? When he gets handed this case, they decide to sit back and see how things go before they actually make the offer. So a lot is riding on all of this. And so it's just so delicious to see them going at each other, because it's their finely honed actor work ethic and talent that creates these sparks, even more than the script does. But the writing, I will say that the writing is also good. I mean, it's just a very imaginative plot. There's so many twists and turns, and it's like being on this awesome roller coaster ride. And I loved every second of it. I've seen it more than once, and I would definitely see it again just to watch the fireworks.
Yeah, I found it to be a pretty good movie too. And I'm a big fan of Anthony Hopkins. I think I've been a fan of Anthony Hopkins since the movie Magic, which came out in the 70s. And just a fine actor. And I agree with you, Karen. It's kind of weird about Anthony Hopkins. It doesn't seem like he takes any more care or puts in any more effort other than his just stellar ability to portray the roles that he plays and do it, I don't know, amazingly. And when I saw him in the, as I alluded to before, when I saw him in Zorro, I'm thinking, what? That doesn't make any. Oh, he's really good.
Yeah, he
You
was.
know? It's like he's actually the best part of this film. I thought Antonio Banderas was going to be the best part. It's really Anthony Hopkins. How crazy is that?
Pretty crazy.
It was, but yet somehow it just made sense. And so the movie Fractured with Ryan Gosling was just that. It was a fractured. The heat that they were giving off, both of them going at each other, not just verbally but mentally going at each other in this film to see who's going to outdo whom, is really quite fun to watch. Just like you said, it was a good movie. I like that film. How about you, Steve? Do you ever get a chance to see Fractured?
I did not. I have not seen it before. It sounds really good. Anthony Hopkins is one of my favorite actors to watch, and he, in some movies, it's really amazing. He almost lazily does some characters in certain movies, and it's the best acting in the entire movie.
I know. It's like,
know.
how can you phone it in and not phone it in?
I know, it's crazy.
And I've talked about this movie before, but his role in Solace with him and Colin Farrell, the movie, seeing him in Hannibal, seeing him in Silence of the Lambs, seeing him in Zorro, seeing him in play Odin in the Thor movies,
right.
And several larger than life characters that he's portrayed before. And then you see him in that movie, and it's like he's not even trying, and he's the best I mean, he's the name that sells the movie anyway, and he's not trying.
Most definitely.
And he just does. He's so good, and it'll be worth a watch for him alone.
I agree. He's in a new TV series now called Westworld.
It's really good.
It's really good, and he's the creator.
It's different.
He's the creator / mentor / motivator of these characters, and he talks to them like they're really real people, and he understands and sees what he needs to do to fix it. Don't worry, I've got it. Don't worry, I've got it. Yeah, just a stellar actor. One of my favorite also. So, hey, Steve, got another film for us?
I do have another film. I want to tell you a story, if I may. Well, that's a good lead in. I'll take it. I want to tell you a story about Nicholas Angel. He's a police constable for the Metropolitan Police Service in London, and he is the best at what he does. We would call a person all American. This guy is all England. He's trained himself. He's studied essential skills he needs to be the best police officer that he can be. And, he's stand up and he's a model, and everyone in his police department hates him for it. So what his police department decides to do is, since he is doing too good of a job, and he is making everybody else look bad, they decide to ship him to the small town of Sanford, I believe it's called. Yeah, small town of Sanford. It's a very nice, quiet, quaint village in England for this story. And he goes there, and there's nothing wrong. There's no crime. There's no murder. The biggest thing he has to running on the loose. It's crazy. But he slowly starts to figure out that there's something not quite right about this quaint and quiet town. And he slowly uncovers that the neighborhood watch has been taking its meticulous time under the radar to create accidents in order to get rid of people that may make the town look very down trodden or on the down. And they have to be so perfect because they have to win Village of the Year. They've always won Village of the Year. They don't know anything other than Village of the Year. And he slowly starts to uncover this plot, and it just goes crazy from there. The movie I'm talking about is called Hot Fuzz.
Oh.
I've never heard of this movie.
Nick Frost.
Yeah,
Say what?
I have. It's a melodramatic comedy.
Very melodramatic comedy. The actors, the directors, the writers, the people that deal with the explosives and dealing with armaments and stuff like that, they watched over 100 action films and cop films in order to pay homage in the entire movie to some of their favorite films, starring Simon Pegg, Nick Frost, Jim Broadbent, Timothy Dalton, Martin Freeman, Cate Blanchett makes an appearance in this movie. It's got a really stellar cast. It's really deep in a British style of humor. It's part of the trilogy for Simon Pegg and Nick Frost that started with Sean. Hot Fuzz being their police spoof, and at World's End, which is the last one they did for this, being their alien Invasion of the Body Snatchers style spoof that they've done. And it's very funny. In my opinion, it's very funny with a very serious tone. It's funny to see Simon Pegg working the very serious cop and Nick Frost working the very nonchalant, nothing's ever really happened. Hey, have you ever done this? Have you ever done this? Have you ever jumped in the air while firing a gun? Have you ever jumped in the air while firing two guns? Have you ever slid under a table while firing a gun at somebody? Have you ever been stabbed? Yes. You've been stabbed? Just stuff like that. You see at the beginning of the movie, Simon Pegg was actually stabbed by Santa. So evidently he's not as much of a model citizen as you'd think, but whatever.
But I knew that.
I've heard getting on the naughty list gets you coal. I didn't know it actually got you stabbed.
Yes. The knife is made out of coal.
But it's just a funny movie, and it's funny to see the little intricacies of where they weave in the neighborhood watch and how nonchalant all of the accidents that happen in the town are just glossed over as accidents, and they're not seen for what they really are until he comes along and uncovers the truth. And then it just goes into like the last 30 minutes of the movie is I'll use a phrase, is a balls to the wall action movie. And it's really good. It's definitely worth checking out.
Now, here's an irony about what you said, and as you described the film initially, it reminded me of this quirky television series called Battle Creek, about Battle Creek, Michigan. And the premise is this really good detective who has a stellar rate for convictions, arrests, convictions, all this stuff. And it gets to the point where he's so good, they hate him. And so they send him to this small, out of the way place in Michigan called Battle Creek. And when you were describing it, I'm thinking to myself, I'm seeing this, in my head. I'm like, wait a minute, that sounds just like Battle Creek. Okay. I mean, there's obviously after that, it changes, but up to that point, it's very similar. Interesting.
Well, it could be one of those, somebody saw Battle Creek and was like, this seems like a really good idea. Let's make it funny.
Because Battle Creek actually came out in, what year was that? Battle Creek is after it, so they may have gotten the idea from
Oh,
your movie because this came out.
oh,
Battle Creek came out in 2015.
oh. Well, yeah, maybe somebody was like, "Hey, I got an idea. I'm going to steal it from England," but
Yeah, well, you know, a lot of the it's funny because a lot of TV shows um, cross the borders in both directions and are remade. And a very good example is
The Office.
oh, I didn't know about The Office.
Yeah,
Um,
The Office was originally a British comedy.
yeah, but there's a lot of crossover shows that were British shows first, like what is it? In London, she's a dame. Give me a second here. Oh, I almost had it.
Yeah, I'm drawing a blank for some reason.
Yeah, there's a police drama where the female inspector, she's a female inspector, and she's um, the first female, in charge, and
Mm-hmm.
the problems that she has in an all male society in the police department, and people not wanting to help her, and I think it's called Private something. I think. Well, anyway, I'll be here forever trying to find that thing. So, but it, there's a lot of that crossover going on. So there's a very good possibility they knew something about, uh, excuse me, about the film and decided to use parts of it to get their story across. That's like comedians say, there's no joke that I heard that I never used. So.
Right.
Um, All right. Well, my last film to keep us going here, as it's we're getting a little long in the tooth here, is a movie with Mark Wahlberg. I think Mark Wahlberg is a decent actor. I'm not by any means saying he's a great actor, but he finds himself and he puts himself in a good position with a lot of the films that he's in, and I think this is no different. Basic essence of this is we got a guy who more or less was covert in his abilities, and he's a sharpshooter. And the one thing about a lot of military films I've seen, especially recently, a lot of situations where you have these people that are so patriotic and they want to give themselves so much to the cause to keep this country safe. And although I believe that that is very noble, if nothing else, and it is a situation where you're putting your life in danger for the good of your country and maybe in some cases mankind. But I think there is a naivete that comes along with that. And I think Shooter gives you a very good view of that naivete in that you are so involved and you want to be so involved in trying to help a situation that you have blinders on and you don't see anything else but the mission and but the situation. And this movie kind of gives that across. And basically, this sharpshooter is approached by some other coverty kind of government people who have to keep the president safe in his particular location, and they bring him on as an expert to help them keep the president safe, when in reality they're trying to frame him for the attempt and or murder of the president. And his naivete gets him in trouble early in the film. Now, fortunately, his abilities to um, that he acquired in his training over time help him to um, continue to survive as the movie goes along. It's just so interesting to me how um, easily he was persuaded to do this. Another situation is Jack Reacher movies, Tom Cruise movies. Not so much Jack Reacher as much as it is the other characters in the film who are so naive about circumstances and situations that they fall prey to um, big business or some landowner or whatever, and you know you have to have somebody who has a better head on their shoulders to get you out. Well, Mark Wahlberg does this evolution in this film. He goes from being so patriotic that it makes no sense to being understanding where his position is, being framed and rebuilding himself and evolving again into a much better self. And now he's no longer the hunted, but the hunter. Um, so in that realm, it makes the movie pretty interesting. So you're not just kind of pigeonholed into one spot. And a director who has become a very good friend of Denzel Washington over the past few years. This movie was directed by Antoine Fuqua, and also has an actor who you don't see very much in films anymore, which is Danny Glover. So this is a pretty decent movie, and it's a nice movie to see somebody go from one extreme to another in how he thinks about things, and he realizes that he needs to not just do better, but also make amends for things that were happening around him that was not just affecting him, but his family and people that he knew and loved. So, Shooter is a pretty good film, espionage type film, directed by Antoine Fuqua, starring Mark Wahlberg. I liked it a lot. I've actually seen this movie twice also. So I suggest this movie to everybody. So moving right along, what about you, Karen? What's your last film that you want to talk about?
My last film is Michael Clayton, starring George Clooney, Tilda Swinton, Tom Wilkinson, directed by Tom Gilroy. Tom Gilroy received an Oscar nomination for his direction of Michael Clayton, and he also was nominated for screenplay writing because he contributed to the screenplay. And this is a movie. It's one of those sort of conscious raising or conscious focus type movies. Like if you're a decent person, you care about what happens in the world, then we're making this movie for you. That kind of movie.
Okay.
And I think George Clooney, who starred in it, also received an Oscar nomination for Best Actor. And well deserved, I think. He really inhabited this role. Now, that said, I mean, I love George Clooney's politics. I'm not such a fan of his acting because, frankly, you know, the way that Anthony Hopkins doesn't actually do anything to change his physicality for a role, but somehow he seems different in roles. Well, George Clooney doesn't do anything different either, and he seems the same in all of his roles. So unless it's a role that specifically like you needs to use the things that are interesting or unique about George Clooney, then it's not going to work out well because George Clooney doesn't do those things that other actors do to change how they're perceived, and to evoke a different character with a different set of ethics or whatever. So he doesn't do that. But when you can marry George Clooney as the person who acts when called upon to act, if you can marry that person with the right subject matter and the right plot, then you can have a really compelling story. So I think that's what happened here. And I think my personal opinion is that George Clooney has to be personally invested in the message of the film. Otherwise, it also just doesn't go well. I think he was personally invested in this movie, and it's one of those movies. It's sort of like a mystery wrapped in an enigma type movie, in that you have what looks to be sort of like this lawsuit that's going along, but then something terrible happens. George Clooney is sort of just going about his day as the fixer for this major, I mean, very much of a heavy hitter law firm. And I guess I'm on a law thing today because, you know, it's like debating, you know, then trial criminal law, now it's civil law. But the movie opens with George Clooney. He's not a partner in this firm, but he's been with this firm for a long time. And he makes a crap load of money, none of which he saved. So he's made a crap load of money, and because he's not a partner, but he has a great amount of experience in the way that, you know, associates never would have. He's sort of landed in the position of fixer. So if there's some client for the law firm that needs a lot of hand-holding, or if you need an enforcer type person, like if you need to, you know, get a settlement very quickly, or, you know, basically scare the bejesus out of the other guy and their lawyers, George Clooney is the guy that you send in to do it. Because he will have the backing of all the partners, and because, you know, he's been there. I mean, he was a trial attorney. He knows how the game is played and all that stuff. So that's his job, and things are just going along, and he's got all of these problems, as everybody does. But as he's taking a walk to kind of clear his head, his car blows up. He's like, what the hell? What is going on there? And it's like, well, I could have sworn I had maintenance done just last week, so it couldn't be that. I wonder why this is happening. So that starts his just, you know, sort of really long journey trying to figure out what the heck is going on. In the meantime, there is a class action lawsuit brewing about agribusiness and chemicals and the evil chemical corporations who are trying to ruin Mother Earth for everybody. And one of the attorneys is being deposed. The attorney for the other side is being deposed, and that attorney is played by Tom Wilkinson. And he has a nervous breakdown in the middle of the deposition and starts taking off all his clothes. So, and George Clooney is called in to talk him down. So that's kind of weird. That's really, really weird. And then there are all these other weird things going on that all tie together in some bizarre way, along with attempted murders and, divorces and children. And, you know, it's like you had everything but the kitchen sink, but it is artfully done. And it's I thought Michael Clayton was very interesting movie because it was told from the point of view of not the crusading plaintiff's attorney like Aaron Brockovich, where you had Albert Finney is like the crusading plaintiff's attorney. Mm-hmm. It wasn't told from that perspective. It was told from the defense attorney's perspective. So that's kind of interesting. And the way in which one of the attorneys for the bad guys, the evil corporation, tries to find his way back to humanity in some way. So interesting, very interesting story. And like I said, full of twists and turns. Tilda Swinton did receive, I think, Best Supporting Actress, the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress for her turn in Michael Clayton. And she, I don't recall that she had a huge amount of screen time, but the time that she had was riveting. You just couldn't take your eyes off of her. She was extremely compelling as this person who is part of this web of lawyers who's trying to jockey for position here. Jockey for position in the film. And again, I think the film is well written, and it really does sort of highlight George Clooney's particular talents, his screen presence. So it's very enjoyable to watch. I would say Michael Clayton and Up in the Air are probably two of George Clooney's better movies, better turns at movies. It's definitely well worth watching because it's just a very well put together movie.
Cool. How about you, Steve?
I have a movie based in historical fantasy.
Historical
I would
fantasy.
I would say it because I love movies that historical fantasy. It is a historical movie, but it has a lot of the the reason I love the movie 47 Ronin is because it chooses
Oh.
to it chooses to put this isn't that movie, but it chooses to pull in um, stories and tales and myths and things from that the movie is about. The movie that I'm talking about is 300.
Mhm.
And
Oh,
say what?
I said, oh,
Oh, yeah. The reason I like 300 is one, you really get an interesting feel for the movie because the character's name is Dilios. He's part of the Spartan army, and he's telling a story of the Battle of Thermopylae, the great battle of the 300 Spartans led by King Leonidas, and he's giving a narrative over a narrative overtone to the entire movie. And he doesn't talk during the entire movie, but he really, really gives you insight. And he uses that fantastic fantasy style of storytelling that the Greeks were so known for in all of their legends and stories.
Mhm.
And he's trying to inspire these Spartans and Athenians that are standing around this fire to fight this battle that's coming. But in order to inspire them, he tells them this story. He starts with King Leonidas, who is played by Gerard Butler. He starts by telling a story of his youth and growing up and a lot of societal intricacies that the Spartans went through. The fact that infants had to be perfect. If there were any flaws, they were thrown away and discarded because Spartans had to be perfectly strong and healthy as babies. They were trained violently growing up in the art of war, in the art of defense to defend great Sparta. And then him going off on a journey to come into manhood and then coming back to claim his kinghood. And then it shows his wife, Lena Headley, who does a really good job of portraying a strength of Spartan women. And, an uncompromising style in the movie, which she has to give up a little in order to get what she wants toward the end of the film. But King Leonidas disregarding, the I forget the name, basically the oracles that tell him not to go to war. He takes 300 of his men and he meets 7,000 Athenians on the way to Thermopylae. And they see the carnage and wreckage that the Persian army is leaving in their wake of Greece. And this is the second Great War between Persia and Greece, the Persians being beaten back in the first one. So evidently they didn't get enough. So basically, King Leonidas comes up with this idea of there's one point where they have to land in order to invade this certain area of Greece. Well, there's a tunnel, more like a ravine area where they have to cross through, where the sheer amount of numbers that the Persian Empire has no effect. It's just, and they use this very military. It's basically the guy to your right has their shield in front of you and him. You have your shield in front of you and the next person. The next person does the same. And the people behind you have their shields up, and the people behind them have their shields up. And it creates almost this invincible like cube that can't be pushed back. and then you can't push, and finally the enemy stalls, and then you attack, and then you go back in your defensive position, and then you go from there. And they fought for 3 days. Ends up that the army was betrayed by a fellow. In the movie, it's a Spartan, but it's just a true battle shown of determination and willingness to protect your country and willingness to protect what you believe is right from tyranny and from people who believe they're just better and are out to just
destroy and take and keep and all that good stuff.
And I feel like it does a good job. It's really interesting how they do these slow motion scenes in the battles where certain moments will be sped up to get you to the next part of that scene, and then it slows down so you can see everything that happens, and then it speeds up again, then it slows down. They show the immortals, which almost carry a ninja like atmosphere about them, where they use these katana like swords and they're all covered in black and wear masks. You see elephants being used for fighting, which is based out of certain tactics that came from India and also Europe with Hannibal when he attacked Rome. The use of rhinos and bombs, black powder, and things like that, which are all that were seen as like mysticism. So that's where you get the kind of fantasy aspect of it with certain other things that go along. And it's just a really good movie. It's a really well told movie. Of course, it's based on a graphic novel by Frank Miller. And just the acting, I feel like, is very good for a military style movie of this caliber.
I think Butler does a really good job as Leonidas. Very, very proud, very headstrong, yet very loving man, not just for his family, but the family of all those who live in Sparta. I enjoyed the movie.
I did too. I really liked it.
Yeah. I tried to watch the second movie, the sequel.
301.
Dalmatians? No. But
Rise of an Empire.
Rise of an Empire, yeah. And the beginning I had to think about watching that because the beginning kind of threw me a little bit in being a little hokey.
It's a little different. It's not as good, in my opinion, as 300. During the Battle of Thermopylae, there was an actual naval battle taking place at the exact same time. When the commander of the Navy heard that the 300 had fallen and that people had retreated, he actually retreated. And then I believe it was a year later, almost, maybe 6 months, they actually attacked the Persian naval fleet again and ended up winning. And this is about that attack, 6 months later.
Right. Yeah. But the 300. But the 300, I like that a lot.
Yeah, that was an excellent movie.
I like the way that they filmed it to make it seem like it was a style film. And I too like the slow motion, speed and slow motion essence that they use.
Right, I did too.
Very dramatic, very much a nuance for me, and I really like that movie a lot.
You see that type of camera work all the time too nowadays.
Anymore, right?
But I think the 300 really, that's when it became popular. It was like, wow, I didn't know we could do that. Like if we just sort of make the bullet really, really slow and we make the blood spurt, it's even more dramatic than just shooting somebody or just, with an arrow. So now you see that all the time. So now that's become an overused, that sort of camera work has become an overused cliche. But it was used to great effect in the 300. It really was.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate my co-critics here giving us um, an overview of some of the films that we thought were pretty good for 2007. But just want to kind of throw some other films out there. This was a really movie-rich year with regard to film. And sadly, we can't talk about every film, but I'm just going to throw some names out there. And this is one of my favorite films also, No Country for Old Men.
So good.
There Will Be Blood. A quirky little movie, which is, I thought, a pretty good movie, Juno. A animated feature film, which is a Disney Pixar, which was Ratatouille. Zodiac, Atonement.
Atonement, really?
Oh, I'm just throwing it out there, it's obviously relative.
310 to Yuma.
310 to Yuma, yep. Eastern Promise, I like that. I'm a Viggo Mortensen fan. I am also a Jason Bourne fan. The Bourne Ultimatum came out.
I would
Gone
throw out
Baby Gone.
I would throw out Becoming Jane.
Right. And then Gone Baby Gone, very, very good movie.
Oh, I love Gone Baby Gone. And I would also throw out American Gangster, starring Denzel Washington yet again in another true, dramatic telling of a true, relatively true story, or based on the true story of an actual gangster.
I Am Legend, Will Smith film, very good movie. So it was a really pretty, I'd say a really good year for film, and some really nice movies out there. And so we're hoping that you'll take the opportunity to see the movies that we spoke about directly, and then these indirect films, as well as take a look online and see some other really good films that came out in 2007. You'd be surprised at the list. And each of the movies that we watched, that we spoke about, we really enjoyed them, and not just saying that, but really like these films. So anything else before we get out of here, guys?
I would just say I agree with you. I was very surprised at how many good films. I didn't remember 2007 being an especially good year for films, but when we went back, it's like, oh my goodness, there are so many good films that came out covering all kinds of things.
Right.
Just like a wealth of movies to choose from. And it's like, I don't know why that being such a great year for films just kind of slipped my memory.
The one cool thing about doing the decades is just that, bringing up films that we may or may not have seen, films that we don't remember we had seen that were really good. Through the course of all the years that we've been fortunate enough to be alive and actually appreciate film for what it is, it's nice to know that as we go back in time, we can reach back and actually find some of these really wonderful gems that we can share and speak about, in hopes that people will too take an advantage of to seeing some of these films, or taking advantage of seeing some of these films. And I like the fact that we can, this decade's climb to 2017 truly shows a nice evolution of film, and techniques in film, and even evolution of actors in film. And finding out that we have a lot of favorites that even we have put on the shelf and needed to dust off ourselves. So I'm enjoying this decade after decade, and leading us into the next decade, which is 2017, and seeing what 2017 has to offer. There's some pretty good movies out there. So hopefully when we decide to do this again, we'll be able to share even the more recent films that we thought might be really good for our viewing audience to watch and enjoy. So I thank you guys for your efforts in bringing up the films that we did talk about, and in hopes that they'll influence our audience to see some more films. So with that being said, I'd like to say goodnight on my end, and thanks for viewing and watching and listening to us here on A Real Point of View. And check out our YouTube channel under Real Point of View, and also our Blog Talk Radio channel under A Real Point of View for some archive shows and some other films that we've talked about. Please take an opportunity to visit us again here on YouTube. And I just want you to get out there and enjoy the movies. For myself and for Karen and Steve, I'd like to say have a nice night, and make sure you're taking advantage of the movies out there, ladies and gentlemen.
2007.
2007. Steve? No?
Mm.
Woo. From 2007. Yeah. Okay.
Movies were great in 2007. Other than that, everything else sucked.
Okay, great. Well, yeah.
Let's be honest.
You do raise an interesting point there.
Thank God for film.
Yeah.
Thank God for film.
Totally.
Indeed.
The entertainment that takes you away from life. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Have a good night.